Remember in high school when your history teacher told you about manifest destiny and how America just wanted more land? When you hear the word manifest nowadays, it's usually in a spiritual context, like trying to manifest a good job or better mental health. But in reality, it was more like a way to sell imperialism to the US public, which became quite the trend at the dawn of the 20th century. Anyways, by 1890, America had basically speed ran the entire continent until they physically couldn't go any further west, displacing and killing native peoples in the process. But they were having so much fun expanding that they didn't want to stop, so they had to get a little more creative and started grabbing up islands. Why did they do this? Well, Americans genuinely believed that their democracy made them morally superior and wanted to share their gift with the world. At the same time, industrialization created this massive appetite for resources, markets, and labor. So imagine it's the middle of the 1850s. America looks to the west and goes, those islands over there look. In 1856, Congress passed the Guano Islands Act, which let the US take unclaimed islands containing guano deposits. What is guano? Well, it's bird poop, but it was very popular for its use as fertilizer, and in the mid-19th century, the US got guano mania and used up basically all of it in the States. This is when America basically soft-launched imperialism. And since it was enacted, the US has used it to take resources from over 100 islands, but only 10 are still claimed as territories today. Those are Baker Island, Howland Island, Jarvis Island, Nassau Island, Johnson Atoll, which became a military base and weapon testing site, but got severely polluted because it became a dumping grounds for chemical weapons. Kingman Reef, Swains Island, Midway Atoll, the Bajo Nuevo Bank, and the Serenina Bank. Most of them were small islands, reefs, or just places where birds pooped. A few of them have wildlife reserves, and others established military bases that were strategic pieces in multiple wars. Wow! If making money off these empty islands was that easy, imagine what they could do with a whole kingdom. In the 1890s, the US was seeing a huge influx of immigrants, and rapidly growing cities made a lot of people anxious about their future. At the same time, the country had entered a severe economic downturn, getting as bad as a 17% unemployment rate in 1893. Now, imagine seeing Hawaii, a major trading hub right in the middle of the Americas and Asia. This is a place with an already complicated history with white people. Since the 1850s, roughly 3/4 of the land was privatized and bought up by foreigners for capitalist ventures, mainly sugar plantations. They brought in large numbers of foreign workers, which diluted the population of native Hawaiians. This all gave way for the creation of the Hawaiian League by white foreigners in order to get better treatment for their businesses. This process included threatening King David Kalakaua into accepting the Bayonet Constitution that nerfed the crown, set up a military base, and set voting rights to just include property-owning literate males, so just white islanders. Then the next monarch, King David's sister, tried to reverse the Constitution and bring power back to the islanders, but the League really didn't like that, so they threw a coup. Their goal was to get Hawaii annexed by the US, and they sent a treaty of annexation after taking power, which President William McKinley saw as an opportunity for a free island in a perfect location, and was kind of scared that Japan might take it first, so he annexed it with the New Lands Resolution in 1898. But this process was not for the benefit of the Hawaiians. The islands were taken over for economic reasons and was annexed by the US for strategic military positioning. And over time, the island has been commodified as a tourist location with exotic culture, when in reality, most of the stuff they advertised was manufactured to entice white Americans to come visit. Because American politicians feared the political influence of a majority non-white state, it wasn't until 1959 that Hawaii finally added the 50th star to the flag. It was mostly because the territory wanted it, and after some pressure from the UN, America gave Hawaii the vote, which passed easily. But along with the Hawaii annexation, something else happened in 1898 too. I just can't remember exactly what. Oh yeah, it was that. In 1895, Cuba started a revolt against their colonizers, Spain. Being close in proximity, US newspapers picked up the stories of revolutionary Cubans being brutally oppressed, and Americans were like, oh, I've seen this one before, and unsurprisingly sided with the Cubans. The US was affected too. since the conflict made it harder for American shipping companies to move through waters. But then in 1898, the USS Maine exploded right outside of Cuba. And the explosion probably wasn't caused by Spain, but the papers were not exactly known for their nuance. Citizens became irate, and the US did want more land, so war was declared. The US deployed their navy, which destroyed Spanish fleets. Spain surrendered within 4 months, and the US got 3 territories that were previously under Spanish control, but not Cuba. Its freedom was kind of the whole point. Don't worry, the US still set up a shadow government, but the places they took were... I bet you didn't know this one, because it typically isn't taught in American history classes. But during the Spanish-American War, a Philippine revolution was simultaneously happening. Spain had colonized the archipelago in 1565 and had brutally oppressed the people there for centuries. And even though the Filipino forces were about to finish the job themselves, America came in at the last second to kick the Spanish out. Afterwards, the Philippines declared independence from Spain. But unbeknownst to them, Spain and America actually staged a fake battle, which officially ended the war on their terms. And in the peace negotiations, Spain sold the Philippines to the US. But this whole thing is awfully ironic, right? In a war meant to free Cuba from colonist rule, the US not only prevented another country's declaration of independence, but took control of it themselves. Thankfully, history repeats itself, so around the time the new treaty was ratified, the same Philippine forces from before started another revolt against their imperial rulers. The war was led by Filipino President Emilio Aguinaldo, and at the start of the conflict, he possessed an untrained army with simple weapons and the limited number of guns they took from the Spanish. So, in the early months of the war, the US had overwhelming success due to their technological superiority. So in order to adapt, Filipino forces used guerrilla warfare tactics, which were more effective, but made the US soldiers increasingly frustrated, and eroded their trust with the civilian population. They began scorched earth campaigns, which destroyed much of the Filipino resources, and relocated civilians into concentration camps. Yeah, seriously, those concentration camps, where thousands of people died from disease and starvation. There were also serious reports of US soldiers robbing, raping, torturing, and mass slaughtering Filipinos. Not all soldiers did this, and some began leaking information to the press back home about how far it had gone. Overall, the war resulted in about 4,200 American deaths, 10,000 Filipino deaths, but over 200,000 Filipino civilian deaths. By 1901, things were not going well, and the Americans captured President Aguinaldo, who issued a formal surrender and swore an oath giving control over to the US. The main part of the war ended in 1902, when the US passed the Philippine Organic Act, which established a Philippine-led representative government, as long as the US still had some influence, like getting to keep military forces there, and of course they still got to exploit their natural resources. The US then continued to control and protect the Philippines up until 1946, when they finally achieved full independence. This is now the second time that imperialism has shown to lead to the atrocious subjugation of a people, but was responsible for shifting the American public's opinion away from direct imperialism. What else did America get in that sweet peace treaty? Found about 1,000 miles east of Cuba, Puerto Rico was also under Spanish rule for nearly 400 years. The Spanish used the island to export crops grown on plantations, and when America took control of the country, they continued the same plantation economy, producing mainly sugar. From its annexation in 1898 to the start of World War I, Puerto Rico had a pretty strong independence movement. But after the Jones Act gave them citizenship in 1917, people there began to fight the idea of sovereignty less and didn't mind being associated with the US. But the timing of citizenship was purposeful, since it came right before the US entered World War I, meaning that Puerto Ricans could now be drafted. In 1947, Puerto Rico was given the right to elect its own governors, and the new leadership led to a series of economic initiatives to industrialize their economy, which were successful and attracted many American manufacturers due to the cheap labor and tax laws. The territory still does not have a seat in Congress, but no taxation without representation means that even though American laws apply there, The citizens don't pay federal income tax. This is a result of the insular cases, a number of Supreme Court cases about what to do with the newly acquired territories from the Spanish-American War. The court classified them all as unincorporated territories, meaning they are controlled by the U.S., but the Constitution does not automatically apply to them. They argued that the U.S. should not have to extend full constitutional rights to people they described as alien races, who were not ready for Anglo-Saxon institutions. The cases created a legal version of the colonial relationship. It was a way for the U.S. to claim economic value without giving them democratic equality. And this logic reappears every time the U.S. considers adding Puerto Rico as a state, with lawmakers stating that the language barrier and cultural differences could be threats to American democracy. But nowadays, Puerto Rico has a population of 3.2 million people, which is by far the largest U.S. territory. Unfortunately, their population has been shrinking since they've been moving to the mainland U.S. in search of political rights. Now, the last territory that they got in that package deal was located out west in the Pacific Ocean. Guam is an island in Micronesia very close to the Philippines. Because of its strategic positioning, the island quickly had its infrastructure built up to support major Air Force and naval bases. And it was a very important piece in both world wars, actually being taken over by the Japanese for 3 years. The occupation there was brutal, and the Japanese subjugated these indigenous peoples to concentration camps, massacres, and beheadings. The war made it even more obvious how valuable Guam was as a U.S. outpost, especially for military projection in Asia. So after the U.S. took the territory back, it decided to give the island designation as an unincorporated territory in 1950, granting local rule and citizenship to its inhabitants, but no congressional representation. Today, the island relies economically on both tourism and the American military. But what about the other Mariana Islands? Just north of Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands are made up of 14 islands who were also previously controlled by Spain. And the US could have taken them after the war, but they didn't really want them. So first Germany had them, then Japan, and then finally the US took control of them after World War II. The islands voted in 1975 to become a Commonwealth of the US, and they formally became a US territory in 1986. The islands combined both the economic pulls of Guam, being tourism and the military, with the declining population of Puerto Rico for mostly the same reasons. They also share the same limited rights of the other two territories, having no voting representation in the federal government. Out in the Pacific Ocean, American Samoa is the southernmost territory, and the only one found south of the equator. The US kind of just took the islands in 1872 to make a naval base, but the leader of the islands went along with it in exchange for, quote, the friendship and protection of the great government of the United States. The US then annexed the Eastern Island Group in 1900 and 1904, around the same time as Hawaii and the other territories from the Spanish-American War. Now, residents of American Samoa, who are mostly ethnic Samoans, are not U.S. citizens, but U.S. nationals, meaning they owe allegiance to the United States, but lack full constitutional rights, including voting or running for office, even if they move to the mainland. It is an unincorporated territory, but what makes American Samoa different is its classification as an unorganized territory, meaning it technically doesn't get to govern itself, but it still does have a local political system consisting of inner working village leaders. That's all the islands the US has in the Pacific. So lastly, the US Virgin Islands are found in the Caribbean, just 40 miles east of Puerto Rico. They include a group of over 50 islands, but only 3 are actually inhabited: St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John. Denmark controlled them for many years and established sugar plantations there, similarly to Puerto Rico's colonial beginnings. But the US bought them in 1917, and I'm sure you expected this by now, but the people there received US citizenship with limited representation in the federal government. Geez, America grew a lot over the course of 100 years, and it was all disconnected from the mainland 48 states. This part of American history is not typically taught in schools, probably because of the atrocities that they committed against sovereign nations, just for military positioning or economic profit. And although everyone was taught that America used slavery, which tortured and oppressed people for hundreds of years solely for economic profit, it is no coincidence that America's imperialist period started after the Civil War. It was a time when the US was looking for economic opportunities, since they could no longer exploit free labor on their own soil. So, they created exploitative labor conditions in other countries, justifying it once again through racial hierarchies. So for America, imperialism meant overthrowing sovereign governments, silencing their voices through disenfranchisement, and profiting from exploited people. And even today, millions of people living in U.S. territories are governed by federal law and contribute to the American economy, yet still have no voting power in Congress and no electoral vote for president. So even though the U.S. isn't out grabbing islands anymore, imperialism still lives on through legal struggles, economic dependency, and political inequality. It just isn't taught because it's still working. Thanks for watching.